Hey, good morning, everybody, and welcome to an exciting day for all of us here at Inner Alchemy. For those who aren't familiar with me, my name is John Michael Salvato. I'm going to have the privilege today of being your host. For those who aren't familiar with me at all, I'm the founder of the Inner Alchemy Mystery School, and it's our faculty who are putting on this exciting event in celebration of Halloween and the upcoming Samhain and Shadowfest and all of the other celebrations that we have during this period of time when we honor our ancestors. We've got an exciting lineup of classes beginning at 11:15 in about 3 minutes from now. Each one running about 30 minutes, in between which there'll be a 15-minute break before the next presenter comes. So, what I recommend is that at the beginning or just before each presentation, if you'll go ahead and just hit refresh wherever you're watching this broadcast, you can make sure that you're getting the latest feed. Just in case your browser, there's a glitch in technology and your browser doesn't update or something like that. These will be on the 30th of October if you're watching live. These will be live and interactive broadcasts. So feel free to ask questions, comment, and start out by letting us know where you're watching from on this first broadcast and each broadcast thereafter, just to make sure that your comments are working. And then if you're watching on the rebroadcast, you can certainly ask questions as well, and our presenters will get back to you as soon as they can. And be sure to stick around until the end. These will be recorded, so you can watch the replay. But today, at the end of our broadcast at 6:30 tonight, we will be doing two drawings that everybody who is part of the private Facebook group is automatically entered into this drawing. The first prize will be worth more than $900. The second prize will be worth $700, actually a little more than $700. So we're really excited to be able to offer that to you. And having said that, our first presenter is one of my personally cherished, most cherished extended family members and friends, a sister from another mister, a curator of the curious. It's either the Curious Nest or a Curious Nest. We'll find out in a few minutes. In Edmonds, Washington, Andrea Savar, whose class is entitled Pumpkin Spice Beyond the Basic Witch. So I'm going to go ahead and cue her up. I'm going to let you know right up front. I stink at the technical support side of all of this. So if there are little glitches, don't blame the presenter, blame the producer. Andrea will be with you in just a minute.
Hi, everybody. Good morning. Welcome to our presentation today. I'm just going to say a little bit about kind of what I do on the platform as well before we jump right into the class. And my course that I teach on the platform is plant ancestry. And what it entails is digging a little deeper into the connections that we have with plants and plant spirits through folk magic. And I am a folk magic practitioner that I've been doing this kind of my whole life and learned primarily from family, but then added on and made it my own practice, as I grew. And my mother's side is Italian, and then my adopted father's side is Persian. And so I kind of learned from both of those cultures about how we use folk magic. And later, Adam is going to do something just about folk magic, so I won't dig too deeply into that. But I think one of the reasons I picked pumpkin spice is because it is of the time. It's this time of year. People start, getting really excited about it, as they should. And I wanted to kind of dig a little deeper with you and talk about why some of those spices are so important, not only in folk magic, but also globally, how they really did change so much of um, our history for better and worse, and how now, kind of in our day and age, how we can use those spices to really um, bolster some of our sympathetic magic and some of the things that, like, why do we do the things that we do in folk magic? So I just want to get started. The spices that we're going to talk about are that make up pumpkin spice, which is, now so very popular, but really always has been popular in one way or another for quite a long time. The five spices that make it are cloves, allspice, ginger, nutmeg, and cinnamon. And um, they come from different parts of the world, although most of them, or many of them, come from Sri Lanka or into different parts of Indonesia, and have been used for, as long as people were in proximity to those plants. And I think one of the things we tend to think about when we're using those particular spices is, I think we've forgotten in our day and age, because they are so accessible now, how important these spices were to our human ancestors, but also how that kind of interrelates with the plants themselves. Um, I think one of the things with folk magic is, the way that I think about it and approach it is, what may seem on the surface as a formula to create certain types of workings, um, it goes much deeper than that. Like, we have that sort of surface level of working that we do, where you might say, oh, they're just, mixing together a few things and saying a few words and putting something into action, which is exactly what we're doing. But the reasons we choose certain herbs and certain plants is because we have specific connections with them. And I know, a lot of work has been done um, in with certain authors who have created, very beautiful books, like Scott Cunningham's books, or other books that have recently been written that have the certain planetary aspects that go with plants and whatnot. But I honestly think that's great if you just need to confirm something. But the real power kind of comes in understanding a plant's history, and the way that a plant has been, that we've worked with plants as humans, and how it inspired our let's see, how would I say this? How it inspired our progress, or how it inspired our detriment. And I feel like there's nothing um, more important than really looking closely at those links, because that's kind of where all that energy and purpose builds upon when we're in this present moment using those same types of formulas. So I'm going to give a little bit of history about each plant, along with how we use them magically. And I want to do these all kind of separate and then show how they work together and why we use them. Pumpkin spice herbs are all, pumpkin spice spices, sorry, would just be herbs in the Northern Hemisphere here, are, how do I say, they all are associated with fire and with warmth and with prosperity. And I don't think that's necessarily just random that we do those, that we have those associations with those particular spices. Um, so when we're using these spices, we are actually creating, especially combined, a very, very strong combination of fire, and it's really rather magnificent if you think about it. So cloves. Let's start with cloves. Cloves are one of the more anciently traded uh, spices that we know of, and along with several others on this list. Some are a little more contemporary to many people, but clove is an old one, and it is also associated with protection, abundance, healing. There are many different healing uses for cloves, and it has been traded primarily in China for thousands of years. It started to make its way into Europe with the Arab traders. And one of the funny things was that, in order to keep a lot of these spices, their origin, to protect their source, if you will, they were traded, and along with it became all of these stories and myths of where they really originated. And I'll get into a few of those when we talk about cinnamon, but clove is kind of one of those as well. Clove does originate from Indonesia and from the Maluka Islands. And it was protected for a very long time, the secret of where it actually grew. But, when Europeans started the hunt for spices, because they wanted to kind of corner their own market on it and stop relying on different traders coming from the east, they eventually found Maluka. And, instead of approaching it the way that the other traders had for many years, they they quickly colonized the island, and in doing so, they really decimated a lot of the culture that was there. And we will see this repeat throughout this particular history. Now, one of the things with the islanders of Molucca was that they had a very symbiotic relationship with the cloves. And I feel like this is something that I talk a lot about in my classes, is our symbiotic relationship with plants and how they are our teachers. Their relationship was so symbiotic that when a child was born, they would plant a clove tree, and that clove tree was thought to be intertwined with the soul or the fate of that child. And so it was that type of a relationship. It's more than simply, oh, I need a little money, I'm gonna, grab some cloves, or I need some protection. This was this very, very close relationship with the plant itself as being an integral part of our own health and well-being. So eventually what happened was, it was traded all throughout the world. And in I think it was in 1816, the Dutch, it was the Dutch spice trading company, who was one of the Dutch East India Company, which was one of the absolute worst when it comes to colonialism. Because they wanted to corner the market even more on the production and the trade of cloves on the island of Molucca, they decided that the best way to do that would be to burn the majority of the newly planted trees, so the ones that would correspond with the living children. And of course, that created a huge rebellion, and was probably one of the things that created the downfall, thankfully, of many of those companies, because people started to rebel. Which, if you think about that symbiotic relationship that we too should be having with our plants and our trees and our spices and the things that we eat, that's integral. That's something that is, we can't just detach from ourselves. Like, it's part of our entire sphere of not just magic, but of also just how we live, which I think is what folk magic basically is we incorporate our magic into every single part of our lives. It's not just, we're going to do a ceremonial act on one day. No, this is, you can do that too, but this is something that we put into every single thing. So, when a child would be born, for us, for example, we do plant a tree. When we have, there's a lot of different traditions that in folk magic really show that symbiosis between how we're working. So clove has this history of very, very connected to our well-being. one of the uses too that I want to talk a little bit about some of the healing properties. I don't, in most of my classes, I do talk about that. But since I only have like 30 minutes, I'm seeing the clock ticking. Um, we do use it for also for healing teeth and gums. Like if you have a toothache, you can put with like a cotton ball just a little bit on the affected area. There are many, many uses for protection, especially the Italians. We do in the winter, usually around Christmas time, December, we take the little oranges and we do the pomeranz. And I actually will teach about that in the December class. We'll talk a lot more about oranges and cloves. But for now, it is one of our pumpkin spice. Now, the next one I want to talk about is cinnamon, because I had mentioned that earlier. It is also one of the older of all of the, not oldest, they're all old, but mostly traded. And it was also one that was kept secret by many of the Persian and the Arab traders. And the Persians even came up, which does not surprise me because my dad will do stuff like this all the time, but and other family members. But they created these really elaborate stories of where cinnamon was grown because they wanted to keep those sites hidden. And one of them relates to the simurg, which is this beautiful bird creature that lives in the highest mountaintops and is basically like a phoenix. And I love that association with cinnamon because it is one that we associate with fire. And so there again was that connection. Um, so the Seymour would apparently use cinnamon sticks, according to the traders, to build its nests. But in order to get them, the traders would have to climb up to these high reaches and leave out a piece of meat as a way to lure or bait the bird away, and then they could jump in and quickly take some of the cinnamon. And that's why, of course, it's so rare and expensive, because if you have to climb up a mountain and get inside of a nest of this giant phoenix bird, you're probably going to have to be quick about it. So that was the entire kind of premise of that. In reality, it was from Sri Lanka, and it was a plant that was used in embalming with the Egyptians. It was so there are also connections to the afterlife with several of the plants that we're going to talk about in the spices, but that one in particular had that connection to the afterlife when it was traded with the Egyptians, who used it as part of the embalming process. But it also had to do with passion, again with money, like any type of abundance. And the rarity of it continued for quite some time. I think one of the things with cinnamon that's sort of interesting and why it became such a huge part of our food in the United States and our way of flavoring things in the Americas, including pumpkins and apples, is because in the 1800s they started really expanding where it was grown. And so it was a plant that could be grown in other regions. And so more and more people were able to grow it, which meant that more important people were able to sell it. And it became less of a status spice and it became more common. And that's kind of how, when it made its way to the Americas, it was used to it was really used as a way to give flavor to food that may have been that food like a pumpkin that is a mainstay and that is a North American plant, native to North America. It gave it a food that you could keep all the way through winter because pumpkins are one of those amazing plants that you can store for an entire winter. And if it's done right, you'll have this fresh vegetable in the middle of January or February, but you might need some flavoring to go with it. And so that's where kind of a lot of these herbs or spices played in. The next one I want to talk about is allspice, which is a fascinating plant. And I don't know how many of you, but when I was a kid, I would always say allspice. Gee, I wonder if that means it's all the spices. So why do we have to buy all these spices? We have it all right here. And that kind of, makes sense when you taste it because it does have um, that flavor of almost like a pumpkin spice combo. You kind of get that um, just with nutmeg or just with allspice. And um, so allspice is one of the plants that was used again for thousands and thousands of years. The Mayans also used it during their embalming rites, which I find interesting too, that we've chosen a lot of these spices kind of represent this time of year in some ways, and the food that we eat this time of year and the flavoring of all of it. And that may have been also that association with the dying back in the northern hemisphere. But it was used also for flavoring chocolate. Was very common. It has that, that sort of spice, that almost peppery kind of a taste to it, and yeah, and it's hot. Like it's a warm, again, fire, but it's a warm plant, a warm evergreen, and this is the little berry that's on that evergreen plant. So most of the allspice that you're going to be getting is from Jamaica, and it is one of um, the largest producers of allspice, I believe, even until today, because they really just their soil and the way that they grow it, it's perfect. It doesn't really grow very well in other places, and they've trust me, they've tried. It just doesn't. The berries just aren't quite as good. So they kind of, wanted to keep it where it grows, and so it has become this um, very interesting peppery taste that we've used down the line in things like. Well, actually, there's a little anecdote, and I'll just tell it real quick, and then I know I have to speed it up. But during the Napoleonic Wars, there were the Russian soldiers used to like put it in the bottoms of their shoes because it would keep their feet warm. It has that warming quality to it, even when it's not cooked into something. And they would also do it because it would help with the odor, especially with you're wearing the same shoes. And that ended up sort of rippling down the many, many years, and it became a part of, men's toiletries. Like Old Spice is called Old Spice because it has allspice in it, and that's came from that tradition of putting that in your shoes. So anyway, interestingly, one of the folk traditions is if you put it in your shoes, you're going to, wherever you walk, you're going to bring some of that wealth or abundance with you. So, out of necessity comes ingenuity. And I do believe that that is some of our correspondences when it comes to that particular spice. Now, ginger, we have ginger and nutmeg, just real quick. So, ginger, most of you are probably familiar with ginger and have probably eaten ginger and, love it. I love ginger. It's one of my absolute favorite roots. I think it's just amazing. And there's a lot of history with ginger too that I won't go into all of it, but um, ginger has been used same thing for fire, for giving energy, potency, courage. Like these are all things that are associated with ginger. And if you think about it, for this particular combination, you've got a lot of fire going on, and ginger is that wonderful root. And roots for us are, grounding, obviously, but they also connect to the underworld because they grow underground, and they are kind of our connection to staying somewhat grounded while we work with some of these other spices. So when they combine together, that's kind of our grounding element, if you will. It is really, one of the most amazing healing plants. I used to use it all the time when, with morning sickness, when I was pregnant, I would, just chew on ginger. And I see a message from Terry. I love that you're having your pumpkin spice coffee. That makes me happy. um, so ginger is one of those extremely healing plants that I believe has a very, very close relationship with humans, because we've used it for so many different aspects of our folk magic. You can use it for abundance, like I said, and I'll talk more about the abundance because that's kind of what all of these are sort of combining into. Um, Also with candle work, like you can take ginger root and just slice it into little pieces, and you can even do sigils on it, um, and add it to your altar as whatever for whatever working that you're doing. For me, generally, I will work everything into a food. Like that's kind of how, not everything, but when I'm doing a lot of what I do, it ends up becoming part of something that is ingested and shared with others for the benefit of everyone. And so ginger is one that we can just very easily add in. There are some traditions that specifically use ginger, well, in a very mindful way when it comes to chewing it, but for healing others. But I'm gonna, I'll wait on that one. Maybe later I'll do a class just on ginger. So nutmeg, let's jump over to nutmeg, which is, uh, well, so nutmeg, I think was one of the most influential of the spices for many, many reasons. It kind of, again, it's been traded for thousands and thousands of years. I think the very first time it was recorded was, I mean, as far as what what has been seen by archaeologists and anthropologists is from around like 3500 AD. Like it's been something that has been used in Indonesia for a very, very long time. When the Europeans came and discovered it, it really created one of the bloodiest wars that, all of these spices actually did. They created a desire that was so strong, a fire that was so strong in some people that they literally destroyed other people for it. And nutmeg is a very sadly, it's an example of that in the Banda Islands when the I think it was the British, but then also when the Dutch came there, they ended up, in order to take control of the nutmeg industry, they killed 14,000 of the 15,000 inhabitants, and the other 1,000 they enslaved and made them work on their plantations. And we don't really think of this, when we get out our nutmeg or when we do our workings, but it was one of the most, I think, powerful examples of how fire sometimes can turn against us if we're not using it for everyone's benefit. And same thing with plants. Like we have this. Oh, and just one more thing about nutmeg, and then I'll kind of do the wrap up because I'm seeing the time. I'm so sorry, everyone. I have so much to say about all these plants. So nutmeg, when it comes to folk magic, I think intuitively there are things that we do. It's been in Indonesia. One of the things that you will see is people, like if you're a merchant, you put a little nutmeg in your cash register, and it's supposed to bring in money. Um, there's also one of the interesting things when you think about how you get nutmeg, you have to grate it. And when I do this, when I'm cooking, because I love to grate my own nutmeg, I will just, and we use it in savory dishes for the most part, but obviously it's used here as well for pumpkin pie. But when you grate it, just the act of doing that is creating like friction, and you're basically, igniting your intention, if you will. So that's kind of part of the way that we use that. And of course, all of it, you can keep one in your purse to attract money. That's another thing that many people do. So all of these things, I'm just going to wrap it up real quick here. All of these spices, when combined, create warmth. They create attraction. And that attraction, because if you think about it, many could say, like for me, when I was a kid, I would want to know, well, why do we use, that particular plant for this? Like why is it for abundance? Why does it represent money? Well, the chances are, we can create some mythology around it or kind of pretend that it's something otherworldly. But chances are, because this is how folk magic works, spices represented money, spices represented abundance. Spices sadly represented also a lot of war and suffering. And so we have to think about how we're going to relate to these plants when we're using them. And I do believe that part of that kind of becomes a healing vector for some of the things that have been done. If we just blindly say, oh, this is just for abundance, so I'm going to use it for my own abundance, we're kind of missing a big part of where those plants originated and how sacred they are. So, one of the things, real quick, we now use a lot of these plants for our cooking. And when you're doing your recipes, um, think about, as you're adding them in, like, where did they come from? Get curious about it. Now you know a little bit about some of these spices, but there's truth to all of the spices. Like, all of the plants have their own knowledge and their own history. And when you're drinking your pumpkin spice latte, which now has become very common because these spices have become much more commonplace, also as the production went back to the people. So as you're doing all of these things and you're mixing it into your food and you're calling in, we do it clockwise when we want to call something in. So if we're stirring our coffee or just like swirling it a couple times clockwise, 3 times, you're actually kind of activating some of those spirits associated with those particular spices, and also you're activating that history. And so I think that's where our mindfulness is very important. We have to remember they have a long history with humans. We don't want to fall into some of those pitfalls, and it's all about a beautiful balance created with all of them. I think let's see, what is my time here? John Michael, should I keep going? Or I have a few more things I could say. One of the things we do for like pumpkin pie, for example, now that you're making it, if you think about all of the different ways that you have a root, the ginger, you have cinnamon, which of course is going to be like wood, because it's the inner part of the tree. Allspice, which is a berry. You have clove, which is like a little you see like a pod almost in there, and then nutmeg, which is also basically a berry. Well, pod berry. It's a little. It's one of those in betweeners, and then you're mixing in with it your milk, something that's very calming and soothing, something that's going to balance all of that fire. And then you're adding in pumpkins, and pumpkins represent sustaining. Like, those are the plants that was a plant that in the winter that would keep you going, especially as we get into Thanksgiving and all of those like fake mythologies. Think about I have a whole class on the platform this month of just pumpkin history and pumpkin uses for folk magic. Like, that's one of the things I did for October, along with a class on ancestral veneration. But we combine all those things to make a pumpkin pie. And what is that doing? We're serving up to our family warmth, abundance, that cooling effect of the milk and the mother kind of connection to the milk. And then, of course, the pumpkin, which is to sustain us through any of our darkest moments.
I think we could. I think I could speak for everybody and say we could listen for another half an hour. And I know you could certainly share a lot more. I don't know how you squeeze that much information into 30 minutes. But thank you so much. And to those who are watching, please, keep your comments and questions coming. We weren't able to put everybody's comments on the screen because you have to click the little link inside the Facebook group that gives permission for your comments to show up on the screen. But those comments are still coming. People showing their appreciation for you, Laura and Teresa and Jim and everybody. I want to personally take the time to thank you, Andrea,
Thank
and to
you.
remind everybody that we're taking a 15-minute break right now. Go ahead and do whatever you got to do. Have that cup of coffee, make that tea, use the restroom, whatever. We will be back here at 12 o'clock Eastern time. That's 9 o'clock Pacific time, and you got to do the math everywhere else with Adam Darkley and the magical transformation. Andrea, thank you so much for being here, and we'll look forward to seeing all of you in about 15 minutes.